It's wonderful to be back here again, to be in the ambience of serious and committed prayers and searchers for truth. Thomas Aquinas, my Dominican brother, 13th century mystic and theological genius, he says, whoever utters truth, wherever it comes from, it is always through the Holy Spirit. And this attitude of inviting the four of us from different traditions to share with you from your tradition is, I think, one of the signs of hope of our time, that the barriers between religious ideologies and silos are melting. And of course, they're melting like everything else is melting because of climate change. We gather at a very, very critical moment in the history of our species and the history of this planet as we know it. The report this last year from the United Nations that we have 12 years left as a species to change our ways and profoundly, or a climate change will dictate our future entirely. This is surely news to wake all of us up. And it's news to ignite the fire of all of our spiritual wisdom traditions to come alive, to come together. It is a time for all hands on deck, all religions on deck, all people of goodwill on deck, and all ages on deck. What I invite you to do, since the scientific number we've been given is 12, interesting that this is the 12th anniversary of the Peace Symposium here, also, to meditate on 13 years from today. Add 13 years to your age. And look back. Look back to this day. Look back to this year. And ask, what have you given? What have you generously given to the cause of waking our species up? Of turning the directions we've been on for too long in order that we may recover the sacredness of creation. Years ago, I was given a dream. The Native Americans would call this a big dream because it was not just for me, it was for others. And the dream said this in one sentence. It said, there's nothing wrong with the human species today except one thing. Let's stop there for a moment. I bet we could have a very lively discussion of 99 things that are wrong with the human species today. But no, I was told one thing. You have forgotten the sense of the sacred. That is what the dream said to me. That the one thing wrong with our species today is that we have forgotten the sense of the sacred. If we can bring that back, we will wake ourselves up. We will truly contribute to the healing of this world. Contribute to the activating of a global shift that is the theme of this conference. My favorite guru is Jesus. That's the lineage from which I come. And he said, blessed are the peacemakers, for they should be called sons and daughters of God. Now, he said peacemakers. He didn't just say the peaceful. That being peaceful is part of the path, but being a peacemaker is the fuller path. That's how he understood these matters. And I wonder how many of us think we've heard the words from Jesus to love your neighbor as yourself. Do we tend to think always in terms of, oh, that's my two-legged neighbor. That's my tent mate up here, my bunk mate, to love them. I think what's at stake in our recovering the sense of the sacred is the realization, the rediscovery. It's something our ancestors knew well, the rediscovery that the air is our neighbor. In fact, our intimate neighbor. We are breathing the air, obviously, every minute. The waters are our neighbor. The soil is our neighbor. The elephants and tigers and fishes and rainforests and polar bears, all these beings are our neighbors. And we have to recover a sense of our mutual love for one another. A mutual love for the four-legged ones, the winged ones, the serpents, and the finned ones. All that, I think, is part of loving our neighbor. When I was a freshman in college, 17 years old, I was going to college in Dubuque, Iowa, which is on the Mississippi River. And there was a huge rainstorm, and the river started flooding. And it was all hands on deck. Everyone was called down to the river to fill sandbags and try to save the city. And I remember then, at that young age, realizing I was working hand in hand with Buddhists and Jews and Muslims and atheists and humanists, as well as Christians. It didn't matter what our particular lineage was. We all agreed we were there to save the neighborhood. Well, I think that small experience is what is exploding right now with this news that as a species, we have 12 years left to work together and to take whatever we've learned of peace from our traditions and from our practices and put them to work, put them to effective work. A work that grows out of gratitude, out of not taking for granted. Because Western culture has been taking for granted so much for so long. When I was 12 years old, I got polio. It affected my legs, and they couldn't tell me if I'd ever walk again. And I was bedridden for many months, but I did walk again. And I remember when I got my legs back, saying to the universe, I will never take my legs for granted again. Well, we as a species are facing the reality of learning anew, not to take for granted water, for example. Where I live in California, we just went through a 7-year drought. Scientists say that the dry areas in the planet are going to get drier, and the wet areas are going to get wetter. That is what climate change is about. And learning not to take for granted is part of learning to be grateful. To be grateful. This is how we lead with peace. What I'd like to do this evening with you is to share a few thoughts about the opposite of peace. One way to approach a spiritual concept is to go to its opposite first. For example, if you want to know what justice is, pay attention to injustice. Feel it in your gut, in your third chakra. Then you'll know a lot about justice. And you'll have a passion for doing something about bringing it back where injustice reigns. So the opposite of peace, it seems to me, is war. And I'd like to address a few areas where humans find ourselves at war today. And I don't mean Syria. I don't mean the external expressions of war. I mean the war within the war, the causes of the wars. One war we're in that doesn't get named enough is that we have cut ourselves off from the cosmos. We have our psyches, we have our human psychology, but we've lost a sense of a relationship to the whole, to the cosmos. There is a split in our consciousness, and it does not serve us well. We lose energy when we are no longer connected to the whole. And now, thanks to today's science, we are learning that the whole, the cosmos, is amazing. 2 summers ago, we learned the cosmos was 2 trillion galaxies big. Up to then, we thought it was a few 100 billion galaxies. Each galaxy has 500 billion stars or more. What that means is, 2 scientists have told me, is that there are more stars in the universe than there are grains of sand on all the beaches on the earth. And the stars are a really big thing. Our sun, which is just a medium-sized star, can hold 1 million Earths. Now these numbers are amazing. Every human being, every child should be learning these truths today. Because with learning them comes wonder and comes awe. And as Rabbi Heschel says, awe is the beginning of wisdom. We need to move as a species from knowledge to wisdom. And we need to dive deep into the wonder and the awe that has brought us here in this 13.8 billion year journey. So the new cosmology is inviting our psyches to grow. The human soul is not in the body. The body is in the soul. And our souls are made for the universe. Thomas Aquinas said in the 13th century, every human being is capax universi, capable of the universe. But little did he know what a vast universe we were dwelling in already. What an invitation there is today for our species not only to grow up, but to enlarge. To enlarge its awareness, its consciousness, its courage, its heart. Courage is 2 French words, cœur, large, a big heart. Our courage has to build so that we can let go of old ways of practicing our place on the earth and recover new ones. Now, what do humans do when they lose a sense of the sacred? How do we get it back? This is precisely why cosmology is so important. Thomas Berry says that the sacred is primarily the numinosity, the generosity, the brilliance, the wisdom of the universe. It is by returning to a sense of a relationship to the universe that the sacred comes back. One concrete example, Buck Ghosthorse, a Lakota teacher, a friend of mine, said to me one day, do you want to know how sacred water is? Go without it for 3 days. It's simple. Not easy, but simple. And that first sip of water after 3 days and 3 nights without water, you will know how sacred water is. That's what it means not to take for granted. It's best that we do these practices before 13 years from today, because no doubt we will be forced into do them in the 13th year unless we have chosen that practice before then. Rabbi Heschel says that wonder is the experience of your mind confronting the universe. Your mind confronting the universe. This is the springboard for all deep spirituality, and we are all invited to it. And when it comes to taking on the challenges of climate change, here is how Thomas Berry, who called himself a geologian, one of the real eco-prophets of our time, now deceased, says. He says, "An absence of a sense of the sacred is a basic flaw in many of our efforts at ecologically, environmentally adjusting our human presence to the natural world. It has been said, we will not save what we do not love. It is also true that we will neither love nor save what we do not experience as sacred." What we do not experience as sacred. Eventually, he says, only our sense of the sacred will save us. And so this awakening to a sense of the sacred, and the sacred to me is something greater than ourselves. It's that which made us, that brought us here, rather than that which humans make. And the sacred invites us to be co-creators with the sacred. And that is the great moment we're living in. That everyone today, 18 or 88, is invited to share in a new movement of recovering the sacred and therefore interacting with the cosmos and, of course, the earth in a much more resilient way of giving as well as receiving. And so that is the second war that's going on, our war against Mother Earth. We've been waging this war for hundreds of years, but now the chicken is coming home to roost, and we are being awakened to the price we are paying. But it can be such awakening that it could, if we heed it, and if we work at it, it could be the salvation of our species and of many other species that are disappearing so rapidly. We are living through the largest extinction spasm of the last 65 million years on this planet. The last time there was any extinction spasm like this was 65 million years ago when the dinosaurs disappeared and so many other species with them. And we're told probably by a meteor that hit the Earth. The meteor that's hitting the Earth this time around is humanity. We ourselves are bringing about most of the destruction, which means we can turn it around. I met with quite a renowned biologist several years ago, about 8 years ago, and at Stanford University, and he said to me then, he said, we are the first species in 4.5 billion years of this planet that can choose not to go extinct. The first species that can choose not to go extinct. But he said, of course, we haven't made that choice yet. And that was about 10 years ago. Now, with this 12-year peril in front of us, now is the time to make that choice. And there are many choices we are invited to make, including, of course, for many people, changing their diets, giving the land that we are currently giving to raising cattle and so forth for human needs, giving it back to forestry. Heard a brilliant talk the other day by a East Indian engineer who had figured it all out. He said that, we humans, because we started tearing down forests, actually prevented an ice age from happening because we warmed up the planet. And that's a good thing. Give us a good check. Now, of course, because we're still tearing down forests, now it's gone the other way. Now it's gone into global warming, so that's a bad check. But he said we could undo this in 10 years. He had it figured. Engineers are good with numbers. He had it all figured out. In 10 years, in that time, we turned all this grazing land and so forth back into forest, it could not only stop global climate change, it could reverse it, he said, within this 12-year window that we have. And so vegan diets, vegetarian diets, and so forth are truly an integral part of the salvation of our species, and of those many other species that are going down with us. The brilliance of the elephants and the tigers and the whales and the fishes and all the rest. How sad that they should be caught up in our wars against nature, against Mother Earth, against the cosmos even. Because as a species we have become what Pope Francis calls narcissistic. We are a narcissistic species. We think only of ourselves, our agendas. This is what I mean by breaking out of this war we have with the cosmos, this war we have with the earth. There's a brilliant teaching from Black Elk about where peace comes from. He says the first peace, which is the most important, is that which comes within the souls of humans when they realize their relationship, their oneness with the universe and all its powers. And when they realize that at the center of the universe dwells Wankan Tanka, the Holy One, and that the center is really everywhere, it is within each of us. This is the real peace, and the others are but reflections of this. So here is the medicine to heal this split, this war between human psyche and the cosmos. And in the Hindu tradition, the Upanishads, we read that there is a little space within the heart as great as this vast universe. Wow! You have a place in your heart that's 2 trillion galaxies big. Meditate on that for a while. The heavens and the earth are there, and the sun and the moon, and the fire and lightning and winds are there, and all that now is and all that is to come, for the whole universe is in us and dwells within our heart. Again, our great traditions remind us of how sacred the whole enchilada is that we're part of. And here's another teaching that I learned years ago from an amazing biblical scholar, Christopher Stendhal, who was the dean of Harvard Divinity School for years. He was in his 70s, which I thought at the time was very old. I was about 40. And he came to a workshop of mine on the cosmic Christ. And it was very humble of him to be there, I felt. But afterwards he came up to me and he said, kind of whispered in my ear, he said, remember, every time you see the word basileia in the New Testament, that's a Greek word that we translate as kingdom of God. And everyone agrees that one was one of Jesus' basic teachings, that the kingdom of God is among you and it's within you. It's here now. Every time you see that word, Christopher Stendhal said, you can translate it as creation. Creation is the kingdom and queendom of God. Creation is radically sacred. The divine dwells in creation. And this is why this 70-something theologian, who was still very alive, bothered to come to a 40 or 41-year-old theologian's presentation, because he was excited that someone was talking about the creation spiritual lineage again. And he wanted to teach me what he knew about it. So all these examples from Black Elk, from the Upanishads, from the Christian scriptures too, are saying what we all need to hear today, that creation itself is sacred, and that it dwells within us and we dwell within it. So there is not an inner and outer dichotomy. You don't become peaceful just through solitude, although that is important to tame that reptilian brain. We also become peaceful by taking in the peace in which we are dwelling. We are swimming in peace, and the peace is swimming in us. It is like the fish in the water and the water in the fish. We swim in the divine swims in us. Another war that we can all recognize that is bringing us down is the issue of the masculine and the feminine. A recovery of a vibrant divine feminine and a healthy sacred masculine, a new sacred marriage of the two in human souls, whether we be male or whether we be female or whether we be trans. All this is being stirred up in our time. The women's movement has come very far, but has a long way to go, but has come very far. And with it, the goddess, the divine feminine, has returned. Now, this is something very present in the Eastern culture, certainly in Hinduism. But in the West, the feminine was banished for centuries. The modern era was profoundly patriarchal, and it shows. For example, when the university was invented in the West in the late 12th century, it meant a place to go to find your place in the universe. But with the modern era, it became a place to find a job in a man-made job world. The sense of cosmos and universe and wisdom was lost. Wisdom is feminine. She's feminine in the Bible, and she's feminine around the world. It's very hard to find wisdom in the university today. It's all a knowledge factory, which is really very dangerous. As Thomas Berry has said, most of the destruction of the planet today is happening at the hands of people with PhDs. Lots of knowledge and very little wisdom. Lots of head and very little heart. Lots of power and very little compassion. And compassion is that maternal power that is present in all of us and is present in the divinity. But patriarchy banishes it, like it wants to banish and control everything that is feminine. In both Hebrew and Arabic, the word for compassion comes from the word for womb, the womb. Because in the womb, things are utterly interdependent. And that's what compassion is about. It is about our radical interdependence and acting out of that. Therefore, it's about our shared joy. That's compassion. Celebration and joy. And it is about our shared suffering and the effort to relieve the suffering, or at least to be with the suffering, because that too is part of interdependence. Your pain is my pain. Your joy is my joy. Meister Eckhart says that what happens to another, whether it be a joy or a sorrow, happens to me. That is compassion. And I think when you look around to all the world religions, you find that they're all speaking this one challenge. That we are as a species capable of immense compassion, but our compassion is profoundly underdeveloped most of the time. So the Dalai Lama has said, we can do away with all religion, he says, but we cannot do away with compassion. Compassion is my religion. And Jesus said in Luke 6, be you compassionate like your Creator in heaven is compassionate. And he got that from his Judaism, because in Judaism, compassion is the secret name for God. But Jesus let the secret out of the bag. But not enough Christians have woken up to that secret. Compassion is not about pity. It's not about feeling sorry for people. And it's not about dropping crumbs from the table. Compassion means justice. Because if we cannot deliver to our children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren a sustainable, that is to say, a just ecology and environment, then really compassion goes out the window. It's just sentimentalism, it's just words. We can't even say we love our children or grandchildren if we're not actively involved in turning around, trying to turn around the direction we are in as a species. Patriarchy is that shadow side of the masculine. Adrian Rich says patriarchy preaches a fatalistic self-hatred. A fatalistic self-hatred. It's a sad thing that patriarchy is still dominating so much of our political discourse, not only in my country, but around the world today. That compassion and justice so rarely gets really invoked and practiced. There was an amazing article a week or two ago in the New York Times called "My Cousin Was My Hero Until the Day He Tried to Kill Me." And it's an amazing story about being a boy in America today. And this fellow grew up and he admired his older cousin who was a rough guy and went around being a bully, beating others up. But he stuck with his cousin even after he got married, etc., and emulated him, admired him. And until one day he was visiting his cousin in his home, and his cousin choked him almost to death and beat him up so badly he was in the hospital for months, etc., etc. And then finally he started asking some questions about what does it mean to be a man? What is masculinity? And here's what he wrote. When I look back on the crisis of my own life 3 years ago, the explosion of our friendship and the implosion of my marriage, his marriage also broke down, I see a common thread. My attraction to my cousin and my detachment as a husband both reside in the pantheon of male tropes. Masculinity is a religion. Masculinity is a religion, he writes. It is a compendium of saints, the vaunted patriarch, the taciturn cowboy, the errant knight, the reluctant hero, the gentle giant, and omniscient father. Implicit values include fraternity, dominance, adamance, certitude. These are the commandments of male identity. The virtue of strength invites abuse. Restraint devolves to disengagement. Fraternity yields exclusion. The veneration of these traits is poison to young men. It offers an escape from the necessary struggle of self-reflection. Self-reflection. When I wrote my book on the sacred masculine a few years ago called The Hidden Spirituality of Men, 10 Metaphors or Archetypes to Awaken the Sacred Masculine, a Native American came up to me at a conference. He said, I've been working in prisons for 12 years. Men in prison do not want to look inside. See, they don't want to go inside. He said they want to project on others. For 12 years, they've been trying to find a book that would get them to look inside. Finally, he said, I found your book. It got them talking and looking inside because you're dealing with these big archetypes, father sky, green man, blue man, hunter-gatherer or spiritual warrior, father, and so forth. And he said, what has happened in our discussing these archetypes is that these men are beginning to see the nobility inside. The nobility inside. I think that phrase names the crisis with men today. Patriarchy has poisoned men as well as women, as well as the environment, as well as children, and education, and economics, and politics, and yes, religion too. Men find it very hard to find that nobility inside. Yet this is exactly what all the mystical traditions of the world are teaching us. That we are all sons and daughters of God. We are all belonging to this kingdom and queendom of God, which is our creation itself, our being here. We're already blessed. But we've had these horrible teachings, such as that of original sin by one Christian theologian in the 4th century, that has brought us on a detour, a complete detour. And then this is how he ends his article. And of course, I didn't tell you the description of his being beat up and all that went on. He says, when my children walk down the street from their mother's house, I think of when I hang their coats, when we read and play board games, when I find myself distracted. I wonder if I can give them another model of what it is to be a man. One free of the corrosive impulses within us and the expectations around us. I want my daughter to see a model of what she can expect and demand from other men. And all boys need to begin thinking about how men fail. My son needs to know what it means and does not mean to be a man, what the world would tell him it means, and why he can't believe it. Yes, we have to reverse this war against ourselves, where patriarchy has substituted for authentic masculinity. And once we do this, then the goddess, the divine feminine, which is in men as well as women, will have a worthy consort now that she is being liberated. And of course, the feminine includes Gaia, Mother Earth, and the whole archetype of mothering. And of course, it includes wisdom. Wisdom, as I referred to earlier, is feminine. Another war that we need to melt is that between the young and the old. What we need for survival today. Each of these wars that I'm trying to name are issues of survival today. And how we share the sacred and let the sacred flow again. But another is that issue of intergenerational wisdom. The elders need to come alive today. We need rites of passage for elders. There are too many elders on golf courses and playing the stock market and not present to the young people who are looking for elders. When I did my book on young adult spirituality called Occupy Spirituality a few years ago, we created a questionnaire. We distributed to thousands of young people, young adults in North America. One of the questions was, what is your relationship to elders? 97% said, I'm looking for elders and can't find them. So the elders have been seduced by our materialistic culture to think that they're not needed because they're not in the mainstream of capitalism when you get older, because they're now, quote, retired. But the point I make is that we need to retire the word retirement. It is an obscene word. Instead of retirement, when you get older, there is a refirement, a new fire in your belly. And there is a rewirement that wants to happen. That rewirement is precisely this. You become more mystical. You become more like a child again. Children are mystical. They are fully alive. And so can older people be that way, precisely because we know that we are closer to our end in this particular expression. And so there's a tremendous resource there of a quest for beauty and a quest for connecting, and a special refirement that lots of young people, or older people, are called to today is to link with the younger people, to support them. This past year, I worked with a 29-year-old and a 32-year-old woman and man, starting a new order, a spiritual order, not a religious order, called the Order of the Sacred Earth. And the subtitle, we put out a book, Order of the Sacred Earth, an intergenerational vision of love and action. And when I say it's spiritual, not religious, I mean anyone can join the order from any tradition. And when we took our vows, and the vow is what keeps us in order together, one vow. I promise to be the best lover of earth and the best defender of earth that I can be. That is the vow. And we did our first vows. 80 people showed up at a Buddhist temple in Berkeley. There were indigenous people, Buddhists, Hindus, Christian, Jewish, and at least one atheist. And we took this vow together, and now there are about 45 of these pods, that's what the communities are, we call them, around not just North America, there's some in Peru as well, and involving at least 1,500, 2,000 people. So this is beginning to kind of spread, because I think a lot of young people today are leaving organized religion, and I think in many ways Gaia is calling them. That religion is just carrying too much baggage with it, but an order is something that is much more flexible and is responding to the spirit of the times, the signs of the times. So you don't have to give up community entirely if you're no longer feeling fed by an institutional expression of religion. But to me, the key there is the intergenerational wisdom. What young people and old people have to know is this recent scientific study. A woman anthropologist got a team together, and she examined this one question. Why has our species, Homo sapiens, continued and the Neanderthals gone out of business? Now, the traditional argument was, from patriarchal anthropology, oh, we beat them all up in a war. But no, we now find that a lot of us today are carrying DNA, in Neanderthal DNA. So we weren't just making war with our Neanderthal cousins. No, what she found is this, that your average Neanderthal adult died around 41 years of age. In other words, there were no grandparents. There were no elders. Whereas Homo sapien people lived longer, and they had 3 generations, 2 generations raising the kids. The elders had not an important role, an absolutely essential role for the survival of our species. And I think this is why every indigenous tribe I've ever looked into has a lot to say about honoring and respecting the elders. And it's not about tapping us on the head because we've got white hair. It's not about patronizing the elders. It's a realization, it's a memory. For our species to survive, we need the wisdom of elders with the wisdom of the young people and the passion of the young people. So this intergenerational wisdom is really calling to us today. We're not going to make it as a species if we're just the young trying to change everything or just the old. We've got to come together like our ancestors did. And the final point I would make is the war against passion itself. The war against passion itself. I think there are religious traditions that want to tell us that being holy is about stifling or sitting on your passions. I don't think that's the case at all. I think being holy is about steering, learning to steer our passions. We're not going to make it without passion. Hildegard of Bingen in the 12th century said, "O human, why do you live without blood? Why do you live without passion?" Compassion is a kind of passion. Moral outrage from the 3rd chakra is where your sense of compassion kicks in. It's where your courage begins to kick in. This is healthy masculinity that women need as well as men. This is a healthy masculinity. Meister Eckhart, one of the greatest mystics of the West, says that, he says, instead of asceticism, put on your passions a bridle of love. Now that's such a beautiful phrase, a bridle of love. What's a bridle? It's a steering instrument for a horse. And Eckhart is acknowledging we've all got a stallion inside of us. We've got a stallion around passion, whether that passion is about moral outrage or about joy or about love. And instead of locking your horse up in the barn or cutting off a leg so it won't dominate, Eckhart is saying, get smart, learn how to steer the horse, don't let it run your life, put that bridle on. But even the bridle is a bridle of love. It's non-dualistic, our relationship to our passions. Now I'll tell you briefly about an argument back in the 13th century. Thomas Aquinas, my Dominican brother, who was very creation-centered and holistic, versus Bonaventure, who was a Platonist, Augustinian, Franciscan theologian. They argued about this one question. It's an important question even today. Where are human virtues found? Are they found in the will or are they found in the passions? And Bonaventure, the whole right wing says, oh, it's in the will. So all you have to do is learn to control your will. Oh, I know I can. It's utterly patriarchal. Aquinas said, your virtue is found in your passions. Without passion, we are not virtuous. We're just gritting our teeth, playing control games like patriarchy is always selling us. This is one of the fundamental differences between patriarchal thinking and a creation-centered acceptance of the way life is. Meister Eckhart says, the soul loves the body, whereas Augustine, who represents the patriarchal dualistic tradition, says the soul makes war with the body. You people know from your yoga practice how to love the body, and you know about that sacred marriage of soul and body, and what a beautiful communion it makes. Well, that's what I'm talking about, and you extend that to the body politic. The body politic, it takes a lot of discipline to do your yoga. It takes a lot of love and getting up at all times of the morning and all the rest. And sometimes you ache. But the point is, you've got a passion for it, you've got a commitment to it. That's what love is. So we need to light fires of passion today, but to learn to steer it, that bridle of love, to learn to steer it in the direction of compassion and creativity. So let me close with a statement about peace from a friend of mine, M.C. Richards. She was a wonderful potter. At 70, she took up painting. Said it's too late for technique, but her paintings are wonderful, full of color. But she wrote the classic work called Centering, and where she takes the centering you do with clay on a wheel and compares it to what we do in our psyche and our spirit when we are growing up, when we are maturing spiritually. And she said, we have to realize that a creative being lives inside of us, within ourselves, whether we like it or not. And that we must get out of its way, or it will give us no peace until we do. In other words, peace has a lot to do with how we deal with our creativity. There we are, we're back to passion again. Because that passion to give birth, and there are so many ways in which humans today have to give birth anew. In ways we do agriculture, ways we do education, ways we do politics, economics, and religion. All of it needs to happen. This, in the next 12 years, is exactly what has to happen. A conflagration, a fire of creativity. Because that is what our species has going for us. And Thomas Aquinas said in the 13th century, compassion is the fire that Jesus came to set on the earth. Well, Jesus is not the only one. Leaders, deep spiritual teachers from all the world traditions have come to set fire on this earth. Not the kind of fire that we are currently setting, but that fire of love, that fire of compassion, that fire that lights passion and responds to injustice with both intelligence and passion. And this is where I see the hope of our species. David Orr says, hope is a verb with the sleeves rolled up. So as we grow into these 12 years that face us, may all of us roll our sleeves up to do our inner work, to get in touch with the authentic passion and outrage, what is being called in a movement, especially in Europe today, the Extinction Rebellion movement. Shouldn't we all be just a little bit rebellious about the fact that we're facing extinction? And not just us, but so many of our fellow beings on this planet? Shouldn't we all be in rebellion? The only question is what to do with that rebellion, how to steer it in wise ways, and to find the directions that are effective, not directions of shaming, not directions of guilt and blaming, but directions of working together, building a community of rebels who refuse to go extinct, because truly our species is special. And it would be a pity if only after 200,000 years we went out of business. The earth will go on without us, but wouldn't it be a lot more fun for everyone, and even the earth, if our intelligence, if our creativity, if our genius, if our love was included in the next phases of this world's evolution. May you all be spiritual warriors, that this may happen. Amen.